Within the concentration camps of the Third Reich, there were thousands of brutal and barbaric guards who made the lives of prisoners a complete misery and treated inmates horrifically. The SS ensured that each camp had a reign of terror established over it, and that guards were all on the same page, beating and executing if someone had not lived up to their expectations. Of course, within the barbed wire fences of camps such as Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen, execution was carried out on gallows at roll call, with prisoners being executed in front of thousands to send a horrific message. But there are also accounts of some being burned alive inside of the ovens, but special execution chambers were built to conceal the murderous actions which were taking place. But there was also torture used inside of the camps, with different torture methods bringing pain and suffering to thousands. But many of these torture methods were medieval and took inspiration from a time centuries ago. Join us today as we look at this, and to support our channel, click subscribe down below. One of the most horrific torture methods used in history was the oubliette, and this was also an execution method, as there was little chance of escaping the oubliette. This was a small and tiny cell or dungeon in which a prisoner would be simply forgotten. They were then left in these prisons, which were incredibly cramped and small. One oubliette at Warwick Castle, in England, saw prisoners locked in one position, unable to stand or crouch, as they were just left to succumb to death, with rats also found deep in the dungeon to eat their remains once they had died. It was barbaric and psychological torture, as well as physical torture, but a variation of this was used inside of the concentration camps. The camp command inside of Dachau established standing cells, which were practically oubliettes. These were small chambers made from stone, the size of a chimney, where a prisoner would be forced to stand for days on end in the cell, unable to crouch or sit down, locked into one position. There was a small hatch for air, and sometimes even more than one prisoner was placed inside of these. One man who suffered the standing cells claimed, "It was a terrible state, as I thought it was over for me. Everything was so callous and distant for me. I could not lie down, could not crouch. The best to do was to stand, 6 days and 6 nights long. You touch the walls on both sides with your elbows. Your back touches the wall behind you. Your knees the wall in front of you. This is no punishment or pre-trial detention. It is torture. Straightforward, Middle Ages torture. I had bloodshot eyes, numb from bad air. I was just waiting for the end." Another prisoner claimed that inside his standing cell, he was given a small piece of bread every 3 days, and that on the 4th day he was taken out the cell and was given a normal meal before the ordeal then began again. The point of this was punishment, and it was to torture prisoners, also so they would not infringe on the camp's rules. They were also found inside of Auschwitz, and they were 85 centimetres square inside of Block 11, inside the barbed wire fences of the deadliest camp, and people were locked in these for around 10 days at a time. One man was so desperate in these cells that he allegedly ate his own shoes. It's clear to see that the Nazis got their inspiration for the standing cells from medieval oubliettes, and a number of prisoners would have felt as if they were being forgotten. The strapado was a torture method used by the Spanish Inquisition, in which someone was hanged from their arms, which were usually secured behind their backs. This was torture and was said to have lasted no more than an hour, as it would probably result in death if done for much more. The immense pressure on the arms and shoulders would cause long-term damage, and this was done inside of the concentration camps on small little gallows, and inside of Buchenwald, one guard, nicknamed the Hangman, would inflict this onto prisoners, and the forest was so fraught with screams next to the camp that they became known as the singing forests, with the prisoners suspended by their wrists, which had been tied behind their backs, in this form of torture. Another form of this sort of torture was actually invented by an SS officer, Wilhelm Berger, who worked inside of Auschwitz, and he was in charge of interrogating prisoners. Berger came up with the Berger swing, an instrument of torture, and with this, it was a metre-long iron bar suspended by chains hung from the ceiling. A prisoner would be brought in for questioning, stripped naked and bent over the bar, wrists manacled to ankles. A guard at one side would shove him or her off across the chamber in a long, slow arc, while Berger would ask the questions, at first quietly, then barking them out, and at the last bellowing. At each return, another guard, armed with a crowbar, would smash the victim across the buttocks. As the swinging went on and the wailing victim fainted, was revived only to faint howling again, the blows continued until only a mass of bleeding pulp hung before their eyes. Most perished from the ordeal, some sooner, some later. In the end, a sack of bones and flayed flesh and fat were swept along the shambles of that concrete floor to be dragged away. The boga swing was similar to that of the strappado, as they involved someone being suspended off the floor, but with the swing, the prisoner was secured by their ankles and was secured to a bar and was then battered by other guards, using horrific, deadly weapons. Another method of punishment, but also torture, was flogging, in which a prisoner would be taken to a flogging post, secured to it, and then whipped and beaten with different items. Inside of Auschwitz, prisoners were flogged publicly during evening roll call, over a special device which was known as a goat. In the main camp, prisoners were flogged in the courtyard of Block 11, and a prisoner's feet were locked inside the wooden goat, and they were then stretched out towards the guards. The SS men or the carpos or prisoner functionaries were the ones who administered the flogging, using weapons such as sticks or bullwhips. The prisoner had to count the number of blows in German, and if they lost count, then the punishment began all over again. The amount of strikes a prisoner could receive varied on their crime, but also on how the guard was feeling at the time, but it was the sort of punishment that was so brutal that could result in death. The highest number was meant to be 25 strikes or whips, and this was known to have been fatal itself. But this was a medieval punishment and torture method, and floggings were often done in towns and cities centuries ago to show people not to commit crimes which were considered serious. They were often used as a way to deter the public from certain activities, and inside of the camps they also had this purpose. Often considered to have been one of the lesser torture methods, the manacles were also incredibly painful. They were shackles in which someone would be suspended from their arms in the air, often very high, and this caused a huge amount of strain on the arms. It was different to the strappado, as the arms were not tied behind the back, but they were used in medieval and subsequent centuries very often. One prisoner who was subjected to this in the Tudor period, during the reign of Elizabeth I at the Tower of London, said of the manacles that, "Then they put my wrists into iron gauntlets and ordered me to climb 2 or 3 wicker steps. My arms were then lifted up, and an iron bar was passed through the rings of one gauntlet, then through the staple and the ring of the second gauntlet. This done, they fastened the bar with a pin to prevent it slipping, and then removing the wicker steps, they left me hanging by my hands, with my arms fastened above my head." But this was also used inside of the torture chambers in the concentration camps, with the Gestapo often using the manacles as a way of getting information out of the prisoners, who they believed were involved in resistance activities. These torture blocks, such as Block 11 in Auschwitz, became known for their evil antics that occurred inside the walls, and the commandants of these camps became known for sanctioning torture, and it was almost a daily occurrence. Also, as per with the medieval period and before, prisoners who were said to have not been compliant with torture were often executed in different ways, as they were considered a lost cause. Inside of the concentration camps, there was a huge amount of suffering and slaughter, and torture was dished out more by guards than food was. Violence was the order of the day at the hands of the SS, and if a prisoner did not work hard enough, then they could be brutalised in many different ways. The concentration camps utilised different torture methods that had been documented and recorded throughout the centuries, and the SS and the Nazis saw these as effective ways of extracting information from prisoners. But it added to the reign of terror of camps and the barbarism of what went on inside sites such as Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen and Dachau. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.